What's my favorite Sacramento Kings moment of the season? What happened to Richaun Holmes? And who is my five for the Kings to protect a lead in the playoffs? You're listening to a mailbag edition of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season long and of course soon to be all off season. Today presented by Ultimate GM. If you ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your basketball franchise, then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimatebasketballgm.com or look up the Ultimate Basketball GM on app stores. Our listeners get 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On, all caps, in the game. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer for ABC 10. Had planned on having a guest on the show today. Unfortunately, scheduled things happen, things fall through, but luckily it opened the door for a long overdue Sacramento Kings mailbag or Locked On Kings mailbag episode. So I have 10 questions here that I got from both YouTube audience and from my social media audience on Twitter. I'm going to run through these questions. It's in no real particular order, just in the order that I pulled them. If you have any more questions that you want to ask, we of course can discuss those outside of the podcast setting. Feel free to leave those questions in the comment section down below. I might answer them there. I might answer them on a future podcast if I think they're good talking points. A lot of the questions that I got actually would make for good podcast conversations in themselves. So I'll let you know which ones I'm going to go into a little more detail on maybe in future episodes. You can also send them to me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSac, S-A-C. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com if you'd like as well. I try to answer as many questions as I can. And thank you to everybody who submitted questions to this Locked On Kings mailbag. I want to do more of these episodes. It's really bad that I don't do more of these episodes, to be completely honest with you. But let's jump in to some of these questions. Feel free to provide your answers to these questions as well. This first is from Tom L. on Twitter. He asks, should the Kings trade multiple first-round picks to try and get a third star this summer, or keep them to continue filling out the rotation with young guys on rookie contracts? By my estimations, only a quarter of all players picked 15 or later are rotation players or better in recent drafts. So I'll be honest with you. I have not thought about this upcoming offseason very much at all. And that's a wonderful thing to be able to say in March, right? Normally this time in Sacramento Kings land, we're thinking about the draft. We're thinking about what moves the Sacramento Kings can make. And a reason why I haven't thought a lot about the offseason yet is because a major bit of context for the offseason has not happened yet. And that's what happens in the postseason. So we'll get a good idea in the playoffs of how ready this roster is and how much they can improve, or if Monte McNair has to make some moves, or are there clear holes that he clearly has to plug? Like, I think we see the defensive issues, right? We see the lack of wing depth. We see the backup center issue. And obviously Monte could address those, and we know that now. But maybe they're not as big of a problem if we get to the postseason. Maybe they're even worse of a problem than we thought. Like, we're going to get that context in the postseason that'll help us give it a little better understanding of what Monte McNair and his team should look to do there in the front office. But to answer this question, should the Kings trade multiple firsts to try and get a third star? This is a horrible way to answer the question, but it depends on who the star is, right? And my thing was always going to be like, if the Kings are going to add a star, it's going to be through trades. Like, I feel pretty confident that free agency wise, like the Kings are not going to attract that kind of talent. They just never have been able to. Now things could change. Suddenly the Sacramento Kings make a close to NBA championship run. Maybe they make it to the Western Conference Finals. A big name player out there sees the beam and sees how much fun and the vibes here and says, yeah, I want to be a part of that. Then the question is, how much money do the Kings have to offer him? And it gets even deeper than that. So to me, if the Kings are going to add a star, it's going to be in the trade market. And more than likely, it's going to take, like Tom is suggesting, multiple first-round picks in order to get it. So it completely depends on the star. But I'll say this. I believe Monte McNair is going to make all assets available if the move is correct. And I say all assets, like I exclude De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis as an asset. You only move either of those guys if you are getting an absolute cannot miss deal, which I do not think exists, right? But does Monty McNair consider using one of the two really good two guards that he has in Kevin Herter and Malik Monk, pairing that with a couple first rounders if it means getting a marquee number one star? I think a lot of teams would, in those scenarios, same way with trade deadline, if a team is out there that's willing to trade a star to the Sacramento Kings, I think the first person they're asking for is Keegan Murray. And I've said recently, and I stand by it, I think the Sacramento Kings already have their big three. I think Keegan Murray is the third of the big three. I think he's only going to get better. So it would have to be a can't miss deal for Monty to pull the trigger on that. Now, he did pull the trigger on trading Tyrese Halliburton. So it's, of course, possible. The thing that we can trust with Monty McNair is that if he thinks the move is right, if he thinks the move improves the team, he will pull the trigger on it. And he's not going to overreact to what happens in the offseason, or rather in the playoffs. He's not going to panic into a move. He is going to do what he thinks, and I think he's earned our trust at this point, what he thinks is best for the team going forward. And remember the situation that the Sacramento Kings are in, the circumstance that the Sacramento Kings are in compared to other teams, right? The Kings are in a position right now where nobody expected them to be here, right? They're going to try and go as deep as they can in the playoffs, and they absolutely should shoot for winning the whole dang thing. I don't think any of us expects them to win the whole dang thing, right? But maybe there are more expectations on next year, but there is not going to be a win a championship or bust next year, I don't think. If there is, then boy, the Sacramento Kings are way ahead of schedule. But I don't think Monty's going to have to worry about making any kind of knee-jerk move to do anything like that. Plus, he just signed a contract extension, so he doesn't have any pressure on him to make a massive move in order to maintain his job. So I would say the likelihood of the Kings moving a lot of draft picks and making a kind of big splash move in the offseason in the trade market, I'd say it's less likely than it is more likely. I don't think if we're putting like a percentage on it, maybe it's like a 30% or less. Like the right move has to be out there, the right name, the right star has to be out there. But the Sacramento Kings might prove in this upcoming playoffs that they don't need to make a big splash move like that, that they have the core already here. They just need to make minor additions and also go into next season with the expectation that Fox and Sabonis and Malik and Kevin and everybody, Keegan, they're going to continue to grow together, get right back to where they are, and even improve upon that. I think that's more the likely route that Monty takes in this offseason. This next question is from This Is Me, also on Twitter. They ask, it seems like Keegan really increases offensive output while Kevin Herter has been out with his injury. Do you anticipate him returning to his previous role when Kevin comes back, or do you think/hope he will continue to shoot more than he used to? With Kevin Herter being out, yes, Keegan Murray is getting more shots. But the reality is Keegan Murray and Kevin Herter's roles don't play off of or rely off of one another. Now, if we were talking about De'Aaron Fox or Domantas Sabonis and how they affect either of those two players, yes, there's a significant difference because of how much attention those two draw. But Kevin Herter and Keegan Murray are both three-point merchants, right? They poach on the perimeter. So they can play the same way, whether they're in the game at the same time or one of them's in and one of them's out. They don't really affect each other that much. So I think out of necessity, maybe recently Keegan has had to take more shots because of the amount of shots that Kevin Herter typically puts up. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but Kevin Herter takes double digits attempts per game. So different guys have to make that up. I think Keegan Murray's been shooting more lately, one, because those shots have been there for him, and two, because he's been hitting at a higher clip, and he's also trying to work his way out of a shooting slump that he was in for about a week or so. Has since worked his way out of that. He's also chasing that rookie 3-point record, which he's more than aware of. So I think it's a combination of things. I don't look at what Keegan Murray has done recently and say the reason for his higher volume is simply because Kevin Herter is out with injury. Because if you look at like how Kessler Edwards has stepped in, sure, Kessler Edwards isn't shooting as many threes as Kevin Herter is, but Kessler Edwards is getting great perimeter looks like Kevin Herter normally gets. Now, you're not seeing Kessler and Domantas Sabonis play off of each other nearly as much as Kevin Herter and Domantas Sabonis play off of each other, and that's okay. But to me, it doesn't have an effect, right? If Keegan Murray has a good look, he's going to continue to take it. If Kevin Herter has a good look, he's going to take it. I know not everybody can get a million shots up, but the good thing about the Sacramento Kings is I rarely see Herter or Murray or really anybody on the perimeter take a shot for the sake of shooting. You just don't see that. The Kings typically will pass up good shots for great shots. Sometimes they pass the ball too many times and don't just take the best shot available in that moment. And everybody's been guilty of that. So Keegan and Kevin are going to continue to share the ball with each other. They're going to continue to get looks as long as they're playing with De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. So I don't expect any major impact. From Richard, I think it's Richard Peter on Twitter. He asks, which five do you put on the floor during the playoffs to protect a lead? I think this is an excellent question because it implies stakes, it implies pressure, and it implies that the Kings are ahead late in a game. So some would think, okay, maybe this is a more defensive lineup, right? I think this is a really, really good question. And I would love to hear you, Locked On Kings listeners, your thoughts on which five you would put on the floor. Let's put a hypothetical scenario out, right? Let's say the Sacramento Kings are up by 6 with 2.5 minutes left. Of course, the opponent that you're facing also might have an effect on this, but let's just say generally the Kings have a small to medium lead, like 6 to 8 points with 2.5 minutes remaining. More than enough time for a team to come back and even build their own lead. I mean, De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis are absolutes, right? So those two are 100% in. I think that's non-negotiable. To me, I think Harrison Barnes is in the game. Even though Harrison sometimes can disappear, he's also been big in certain moments offensively, and he's just so reliable overall. He's been in that spot. His playoff experience speaks for itself. So I think Harrison Barnes is probably out there. That's number 3. One of Kevin Huerter or Malik Monk are out there. And then really the question is, Keegan Murray or Davion Mitchell. And now if you go Davion Mitchell, then you might have a pretty small lineup out there. If you're having both Mitchell and Fox together with one of Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter, Harrison Barnes at the 4 and Domantas Sabonis at the 5. So if you feel comfortable going small and Davion Mitchell provides that kind of defense that you're looking for, maybe Davion Mitchell is that guy. I personally I think it's very close to what the Kings starting 5 is that's on the floor. I think Keegan Murray is going to be more than ready for that spot. So my closing 5 in this scenario would be De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, Harrison Barnes, Keegan Murray, Domantas Sabonis. I think that's the closing 5 that I put out there. No, it's not the greatest defensive lineup, of course, but Sacramento doesn't really have a great defensive lineup. If you need a big stop in situations, maybe I'm putting Davion Mitchell in there to get that stop. But with 2.5 minutes remaining, the Kings can still put that game away simply by scoring the basketball, which is what I'm going to expect them to do more oftentimes than not. So that is the 5 that I am putting out there. Again, I want to hear from you. What 5 are you putting out there in that scenario for the Kings to secure a playoff lead? Let me know. From George Mueller on Twitter, thoughts on Sasha Vezenkov? Is he worth bringing over to potentially start despite his non-existent defense? I've been paying very loose attention to Sasha. Very loose attention. I've seen the numbers that he's put up. I've seen some of the highlight reels, right? I've seen people like oohing and awing over his 3-point shot. I think he could be fantastic for the Sacramento Kings. Here's the question. We know the Kings can score. The Kings don't have any issue scoring. How good defensively is Sasha Vezenkov? And him not being a good defender is not going to make or break his opportunity here in Sacramento. But unless the Kings are losing 3-point shooting this offseason, he's not desperately needed. Now, if it's me personally, based off of what I've seen, if he wants to come over, hey, bring him over and let him see if he can earn a spot in camp. He's also long. He provides depth at kind of that wing position. So I'm all for bringing Sasha Vezenkov over and saving a roster spot for him. I'm very interested to see how his game translates to the NBA. I'm very interested to see if he does more than simply shoot the basketball, if he's going to get the same volume of opportunities from the 3-point line here that he's getting over in Europe. But I'm all for it. I'm absolutely all for it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know a lot about the guy. I've seen his numbers. I've seen his highlights. I think he looks great. I think he provides a lot of good stuff. I think he was having historic shooting numbers over in Europe. The Kings have had a success bringing it over European players before, and it's never a bad thing to add more shooting and more floor spacing, but it's not a huge need or necessity. So I guess I'd say this. I would love for Sasha Vezenkov to become a Sacramento King and get his opportunity here to play for Sacramento and see how he fits in the NBA. But I would not look at Sasha Vezenkov as any kind of significant, massive difference maker. I could be wrong and he could surprise me. And you know what? That would be great. But I don't think any fan or anybody should look at Sasha Vezenkov coming over this offseason as the missing piece to Sacramento taking that extra step into a true championship contender. Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Ultimate GM. I'm really geeked out by this new partner and sponsor because I am an armchair GM, right? I like to play like NBA video games, NBA 2K, and play my GM mode or play my league and take control of teams. But of course, those are more video gamey than they are actually true life simulation experiences. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM gives you as true to form of a GM experience managing a basketball franchise as it gets. You manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, and lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and assistants, trading and training players, making draft picks, motivating your franchise, navigating them through free agency, the draft, all the ups and downs of a season, and more. All of this in a challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is completely free and playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. Locked On Kings listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check that out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com, scan the code, or look it up on the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. Continuing with our questions, this is from Jordan Villalobos. I think I pronounced that correctly, Jordan. Also on Twitter. It says, what do you attribute the Kings' health this season to? I think this is an interesting question because a lot of people are going to say luck, and absolutely luck is involved. The simple answer is it's a combination of a lot of things. The Kings have gotten lucky, certainly. And every team that has any kind of success over the course of the year with keeping players healthy, there definitely is luck involved. Like, it's basketball, it's a sport, it's a competitive game. Players get hurt. But I also attribute a lot of it to this season for the Sacramento Kings specifically. And what I mean by that is here you have a guy in Domantas Sabonis who's playing through a fractured thumb because he needs to. Right, De'Aaron Fox has played through injury multiple times this season because he needs to. Mike Brown has had to make the decision for Fox not to play at times, for Kevin Huerter not to play at times. He said they could go and they want to go, but he's making the decision to shut them down to kind of protect them a little bit. And there's no reason to rush them back. But guys want to play through injuries. Guys want to continue to play for this team because they feel that they need to. Maybe we get to a point where next season and in future seasons, De'Aaron Fox or Domantas Sabonis, maybe they're a little more hesitant to play through injuries because they're preparing and expecting a deep playoff run. Now, I'm hoping the Kings don't ever get to a Kawhi Leonard Los Angeles Clippers scenario where players are refusing to play on the second night of a back-to-back, or they only play like 60 or some odd games a year to protect that player for a deep playoff run. I hope the Kings never get to that point. But I have a good feeling that if the Sacramento Kings were in the position of a Denver Nuggets or Memphis Grizzlies where they expect a deep playoff run, maybe Domantas Sabonis wouldn't have played as quickly after fracturing his thumb, right? So I think the context of the season plays a factor. Also, we have to give credit where credit is due to the Kings training staff. I think they've done a fantastic job keeping this team healthy. I think they've done a fantastic job managing injuries and obviously bringing guys back as quickly as possible, protecting them when they have to. And they have an extra difficult job because Mike Brown has more practices than any other coach in the league. So not only are they going through an 82-game season with back-to-backs and like they just went through a stretch of 5 games and 7 nights, right? In addition to that, Mike Brown has them practicing as much as possible. And so whether it's nutritionists, it's physical coaching, like any kind of rehabilitation, like weights, strength and conditioning, whatever it may be, even like mental coaches and things like that. I think the Kings training staff has done a fantastic job of keeping this team as fit as possible. So it's a combination really of those things that have led to the Kings having this healthy of a season, in my opinion. This question also on Twitter from Blazing Rebel. Do you think us not resting Sabonis and Fox more during this stretch will hurt in the postseason? Sabonis' thumb and general exhaustion worries me a little. This is a great question. And I'm going to be doing a podcast at some point in the near future here on debating and discussing whether or not the Sacramento Kings will consider resting players and shutting players down towards the end of the season after they've secured a playoff spot. I know the Kings are still playing for a top 4 seed, and based off of my understanding of who Mike Brown is, it doesn't sound like Mike's style to rest players, although he certainly knows a whole hell of a lot better than I am. And hey, I'm just happy to be in a position where the Sacramento Kings could consider resting players and cruising into the postseason that way. I think there is going to be a point where in the playoffs, depending upon how deep the Kings go, fatigue will play a factor. And the reality is, like, my expectation, no disrespect to the Kings rotation, but I think Mike Brown is going to clamp down to an 8 or at best 9-man rotation in the playoffs. And I think we're going to see De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis playing close to 40 minutes a night. I think that's going to be maybe a necessity for the Sacramento Kings if they're going to have success in the playoffs. So to answer your question, yes, I do think it could hurt the Sacramento Kings. I don't think it will necessarily. I think there will be moments where fatigue plays a factor. But I also don't think it's going to be the difference between the Kings winning and losing a series. I don't think it's going to be that significant. I think these players know how to take care of themselves. I think there's a re-energize or like an energizing boost to playing in the postseason. Like I expect De'Aaron Fox to almost get a like reinforcement of energy or rally energy with the fact that he's playing in his first postseason. Domantas Sabonis obviously has played in the postseason before, but there are big expectations here in Sacramento. I think you draw energy from the crowds and energy from the significance of the games. Plus, you have to think about this too. From the last game of the season to the first game of the first round of the playoffs, I think it's like a 5-day break or so. So the Sacramento Kings will not be playing in the play-in tournament. Very confident in saying that. So over the course of that play-in tournament, the Kings will be able to get rest and get practice in and prepare for whatever opponent they are going to be facing. And if the Kings finish in the 3rd seed, regardless of what happens in the play-in tournament, they know which opponent they will be facing. So that opponent also gets to rest up, but the Kings also get to prepare for that opponent right away. So there will be time. Plus, the playoff schedule is not back-to-backs or anything like that. They break up games. At least I believe so. I don't remember playoff back-to-backs last season. I could be wrong about that, but I believe there's a break in between every game. So I think it's a little more manageable of a schedule than maybe what we see during the regular season at times. So I don't think it's fatigue could play a factor and might play a factor in a game or two, but I don't think it's going to be the difference in De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis having great series or falling on their face for pure exhaustion, in my opinion. From Ryan on YouTube, these are now questions from the YouTube audience. How did Richaun Holmes go from starting center to completely out of the rotation? Do you think he can adapt to Mike Brown's system and be more effective next year? I like where Ryan's head is at in the sense that Richaun Holmes is likely a King next year. I don't see too many scenarios where Richaun Holmes gets moved. His contract is not the most ideal for a lot of teams who want to acquire him. I do think Richaun has much more to give than what he's showing here in Sacramento. I don't think Richaun is a good fit. And it's unfortunate because I don't think Richaun, excuse me, I don't think Richaun does enough of what the Sacramento Kings need from their backup center. I don't know if they have a guy on this roster that does. And you see what Chimezie Metu does. You see the hustle plays that Chimezie Metu makes and his attacking the rim and his pick and roll moments and catching lobs from Malik Monk and stuff like that in the second unit. You think, okay, couldn't Richaun Holmes do that? For some reason, Richaun hasn't. To me, Richaun looks a little bit slow. Like when we have watched him play, he looks like he's a step slow, and I'm not necessarily blaming him. It doesn't look like his game works with how the Sacramento Kings want to play. Richaun thrived in past seasons in kind of more of a free flowing, running in transition, pick and roll, and his floater in the lane kind of offense, like more of like a free flowing like playground kind of offense. And that's not disrespecting him. A lot of teams play that way. So I don't think he fits with this offensive style. To me, the only way that Richaun Holmes, I think, gets back into the Kings rotation and consistently gets an opportunity is if he completely reestablishes himself on the defensive end of the floor. If Richaun Holmes can become any kind of rim protector, solid defensive rebounder, and someone who can figure out how to be impactful on the defensive end, and he doesn't necessarily have to protect the rim by getting a bunch of block shots, but being able to help on defense and communicate defensively and step out on the perimeter when he has to. Defense is his ticket back in, and I don't know if he's ever going to play it. I don't know if he's ever going to make it work. Plus, he can't be a great defender who's also a liability on offense. Now, I see Richaun Holmes' raw ability, and I don't understand how he could be an offensive liability unless he truly could not figure out how to play in Mike Brown's offense. But defensively, that's where I think the overhaul has to come if he wants to crack the Kings rotation next year. This episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. With the NCAA tournament really heating up, there's no better place to get in on the action than on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. So really, I mean, it's like a insurance system, right? but it's encouraging you to play more and have more fun. The point of FanDuel is not just to make money on your sports knowledge. The point of FanDuel is to enjoy yourself and enjoy your sports gambling in a safe and fun way. That's why FanDuel doesn't want you to just make one bet, lose whatever money you initially put in, and disappear forever. They offer you up to $1,000 in money back if that first bet doesn't win, or if that bet does win. Hey, you've made money right then and there. Go to fanduel.com/locked on. Sign up today. You can claim your no sweat first bet right now. Then you can wager on everything from the money line to point spread to which team will be cutting down the net at the end of the tournament. It's all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to fanduel.com/locked on to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. A few more questions here before we wrap up. This is from SG6279 Gaming on YouTube. Question is it possible for the Kings to pull off a big trade this summer? I'm going to kind of partner this with the first question that I answered. Yes, it's absolutely possible. And I guess big trade, it depends on what you classify as big. I think Monty McNair, like I said earlier, is going to keep all options open, and if it makes sense to improve the Sacramento Kings in the way that he needs to improve the team based off of what happens in these playoffs, then I think, yeah, he won't be afraid to pull the trigger, which he's proven already. But he's not going to rush into anything. And a big trade doesn't necessarily have to be getting a superstar here. A big trade can be finding a fifth starter. A big trade can be replacing Harrison Barnes if the Kings let him walk. A big trade could be swapping depth in one area to add depth in another. Like, it just depends on what you classify as a big trade. But I think trades are likely this offseason to some capacity. They may not be blockbusters like what Kings fans might be hoping for. But I think Monty is going to have more than enough context based off of what happens this offseason, is going to have a determination for the Kings to build off of what they did or what they did this season. And he's going to be doing everything in his power to capitalize on the Kings window being very much open right now. This question is also from YouTube. It's from my best friend, Daniel Coulter, asks, what is your favorite Kings moment so far this season? Great question, Danny. Really appreciate it. And I want to hear from Kings fans on this. I want to know what your favorite moments are, because there's so many. Like, there's De'Aaron Fox's game winner in Orlando. There's the Kings winning that double overtime 176-175 game in Los Angeles against the Clippers. For me, though, my favorite moment is the Kings beating the Utah Jazz in Sacramento by 1 point. It's when Kevin Huerter hit that big three and the entire arena erupted. Like, it was the loudest pop that we've ever heard in that arena when Kevin hit that three. You can go back and listen to it. It literally like pops the mic, the studio mics and camera mics in the arena. It's pretty crazy. Like, it's just such a fun moment to feel that energy, to be there. Of course, sitting in the media section, we can't really celebrate it as much as we want to, but to feel that energy and imagine what it's going to be like in a big moment in the playoffs. But that game was also special for me because my mother-in-law was in attendance, and she had never been to a Kings game before, ever. And I got her tickets to that game, and she went and took a friend, and I told them, like, you are going to really get to experience what Kings basketball is like. Like, you're going to get to experience the volume, the energy, the fun. And she got arguably the best home game of the year with how that game went down to the wire. Maybe it shouldn't have been that close with the Utah Jazz. Lauri Markkanen was playing in that game for appropriate context, but it was an amazing moment. And that's probably my favorite moment of the Kings season so far. Finally, from Omida Homie, I think that's how I'm pronouncing it, also on YouTube, they ask, which player has surprised you the most this season? My pick would be Trey Lyles, because I didn't think him coming off the bench would have such a big impact on that bench unit. I picked this question because I think it's an excellent question, but I'm having a really hard time answering it because I'm not saying nobody surprised me by any means. I think a lot of different players have surprised me in a lot of different ways. Trey Lyles is an excellent answer. I'm not going to say Trey because you said Trey. But Trey absolutely has surprised me as how good he's been, how consistent he's been, how excellent that he has been off of the bench for Sacramento, and how reliable he has been so quickly. So Trey Lyles is definitely up there for me. I guess I'll say I'm gonna give two. My first one is Malik Monk. I've been surprised by how good of a distributor he is and how he's really stepped into the secondary playmaker, secondary ball handler role for that second unit. He's also provided the majority of the Malik Monk like flash and flare big moments have been him like assisting or running an offense and less of him hitting big shots. Have you noticed that? Like to me, Malik's biggest moments this season, with the exception of him scoring 45 in that double overtime game and against the Clippers, he has had some major energizer moments where he's throwing lobs to De'Aaron Fox or Chimezie Metu, or he's just running the offense, showing off his ball handling, showing off these just ridiculous ball bounce passes that I didn't know he had as part of his game. Like him stepping up as a playmaker, I think has been very surprising to me. And then I'll say De'Aaron Fox too. I always believed that De'Aaron Fox had another level to his game. And I'm not surprised that De'Aaron is as good as he is. I'm surprised at how he has so naturally stepped into the biggest moments in the biggest parts of the game and made it look effortless. And that's not just offensively. Offensively is mainly how he does it, right? The leader in clutch points, like he's just so good in the fourth quarter, getting to his spots, hitting big shots, whether it's a three-pointer, that elbow jumper, getting to the rim. His free throw shooting also has improved this year, which is nice to see. But defensively, De'Aaron has not backed away from the challenge of guarding the opposing team's best guard, while typically that best guard is not guarding him. He's taken that challenge on. He stepped up in a major way defensively. So I'll say that too. And then I'll sneak in one more. It has nothing to really do with a player, but how quickly Mike Brown has been able to change the culture in Sacramento is shocking to me, because that culture was so bad for so long. 11 head coaches came through after Rick Adelman could not do it, and Mike Brown did it in a matter of months. I think that's excellent too. I know you asked about player, but that surprised me as well. So those are the questions that I jotted down. Thank you to all those who submitted questions. If you have any more questions that you want to ask, feel free to send them to me. I would love to answer them. I really appreciate your guys' support as always here on the Locked On Kings podcast. We'll be back for a Kings and Suns post-game pod tomorrow night. Big game in Sacramento. Cannot wait for this game. A must-have game for the Suns. Kings trying to avoid their first 3-game losing streak since November. So I think this game is going to be a lot of fun. The Golden One Center is going to be popping on a Friday night, and then on Saturday, they have a chance for revenge against the Utah Jazz. So let me know if you're going to be going to that game. I would love to see you. Reach out to me on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com if you're going to the game, and we'll set up a time to meet. I appreciate you so much. Can't wait to have you join me after tomorrow night's game. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.